Did you know that history's most powerful and beautiful queen married her own real brother? And not just once. Twice. Yeah, you heard that right. Cleopatra, that legendary Egyptian queen we know for her beauty and intelligence, had a secret so dark, so twisted, that historians have been hiding it for centuries. But today, I'm going to tell you the truth that never made it into your textbooks. This story is so shocking, so taboo, and so unbelievable that you'll question everything you thought you knew about ancient royalty. So if you're ready to uncover history's darkest secret, hit that like button, smash subscribe, because what I'm about to reveal will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, this is a journey you won't forget. Let's start in 69 BC when Cleopatra was born, but her story actually begins with her entire family, the Ptolemaic dynasty. This dynasty was started by Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, around 305 BC. Now here's the first shocking fact: these Greek rulers who controlled Egypt started following one incredibly twisted tradition. That tradition was royal inbreeding, meaning brothers and sisters married each other to keep power within the family. Think about that for a second. For centuries, this practice continued, generation after generation. Every single Ptolemaic ruler married their siblings. Why? Because they believed it kept the royal bloodline pure. But in reality, this practice caused genetic problems, created mental health issues, and triggered extreme jealousy and violence within families. Imagine your family dinners involving politics, power struggles, and possible murder plots. This was Cleopatra's childhood. This was normal for her. When Cleopatra was just 14 years old, she watched her father, Ptolemy XII, desperately begging the Romans for help to save his throne. She saw how power was gained, how it was maintained, and most importantly, how it was stolen. Her older sister Berenice seized the throne when their father went to Rome seeking assistance. But when Ptolemy XII returned, he had his own daughter executed. Yes, you heard that correctly, a father killed his daughter just for the throne. This was the brutal environment where Cleopatra grew up. Every single day was about survival. You couldn't trust anyone, not even your own blood relatives. Murder, betrayal, and conspiracy were just part of daily royal life. In 51 BC, when Ptolemy XII died, his will stated that Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only 10 years old, would jointly rule Egypt. But here's the twisted part. According to Egyptian tradition, both a male and female pharaoh were required to represent the gods Isis and Osiris. So what happened? 18-year-old Cleopatra was forced to marry her 10-year-old brother. Imagine this situation. An intelligent, ambitious, educated young woman is being forced to marry a literal child who happens to be her sibling. This wasn't just political, this was a marriage in the full legal sense. They had to appear together in public, perform religious ceremonies as husband and wife, and represent themselves as the divine couple ruling Egypt. The psychological horror of this situation is unimaginable by today's standards. But Cleopatra was far too smart and ambitious to let a child control her destiny. From day one, she made it clear that she was the one in charge. She started removing Ptolemy XIII's name from official documents. She issued coins with only her face on them. She made royal decrees in her name alone. This was absolutely revolutionary because no Egyptian queen had ever dared to rule without emphasizing her male co-ruler. Cleopatra was essentially erasing her brother, husband from power. And obviously, this didn't sit well with the people around the young pharaoh. His advisors, three powerful men named Pothinus, Achilles, and Theodotus, they saw their influence slipping away. They saw a strong woman taking control, and they couldn't handle it. So they started plotting against her. By 48 BC, just 3 years into their co-rule, the tension exploded into civil war. Yes, Cleopatra went to war against her own brother, husband. Ptolemy XIII's advisors convinced him to exile Cleopatra from Alexandria. They literally kicked the queen out of her own kingdom. But here's what they didn't know: Cleopatra wasn't going to give up that easily. She went to Syria and started raising an army. Think about the determination and courage that required. A young woman, alone, in a foreign land, building an army to take back her throne from her own family. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was about survival, because she knew that if Ptolemy's advisors won, they would definitely kill her to secure their position. Now enters one of history's most powerful men, Julius Caesar. In 48 BC, Caesar arrived in Alexandria while chasing his rival Pompey during the Roman Civil War. Both Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII saw an opportunity. Whoever won Caesar's support would win Egypt. Ptolemy's advisors made a terrible mistake. They killed Pompey and presented his head to Caesar, thinking it would please him, but Caesar was horrified. He saw this as barbaric and dishonorable. Meanwhile, Cleopatra made the boldest move in history. According to legend, she had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters, rolled up inside a carpet. When the carpet was unrolled, out stepped the exiled queen. Imagine Caesar's surprise. But this wasn't just a dramatic entrance, this was genius strategy. Cleopatra knew she had one shot to convince the most powerful man in the world to support her cause, and convince him she did. Within hours of meeting, Caesar was completely fascinated by Cleopatra. It wasn't just her beauty, though ancient writers confirm she was attractive. It was her intelligence, her wit, her charm, and her fluency in 9 languages. She could discuss philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and politics. She was everything Caesar had never encountered in a woman before. They began a passionate love affair that night, and Caesar decided to support Cleopatra's claim to the throne. But there was a problem. Ptolemy XIII was still technically her co-ruler and husband. Caesar couldn't just throw him out, so he came up with a political solution. He would reconcile the siblings and force them to rule together again. Can you imagine the awkwardness? Your brother, husband, tried to have you killed, you went to war against him, and now you're forced to act like everything is fine. But this peace didn't last long. Ptolemy XIII's advisors were furious that Caesar was supporting Cleopatra. They saw their power slipping away completely. So they started what historians call the Alexandrian War. Ptolemy's army attacked Caesar's forces in Alexandria, and the city erupted into chaos. During this war, something tragic happened that broke historians' hearts forever. The great library of Alexandria caught fire. Thousands of irreplaceable ancient texts were destroyed. The fighting was brutal and lasted for months. Caesar and Cleopatra were actually trapped in the palace at one point, surrounded by enemy forces. But Caesar was one of history's greatest military commanders. He held out until reinforcements arrived from Rome. In 47 BC, the final battle came. Ptolemy XIII's forces were completely defeated. And here's where it gets even darker. During the retreat, 14-year-old Ptolemy drowned in the Nile River while trying to escape. His body was found days later, still wearing his golden armor. Some historians believe it was truly an accident. Others whisper that it was too convenient, that maybe Caesar or Cleopatra arranged it. We'll never know for sure, but what we do know is that Cleopatra's first brother, husband, was dead, and she was finally free, or so she thought, because here comes the second shocking marriage. According to Egyptian law and tradition, Cleopatra still needed a male co-ruler. She couldn't rule alone. The priests wouldn't allow it, the people wouldn't accept it, and Rome wouldn't recognize it. So what happened? She was forced to marry her second brother, Ptolemy XIV. He was only 12 years old at the time. Cleopatra was now 21. Let that sink in. She had just survived a civil war and watched her first brother, husband, die. And now she had to immediately marry another child brother. The psychological trauma of this situation is beyond comprehension, but Cleopatra had no choice. This was the price of power in ancient Egypt. However, this time things were different. Cleopatra had Caesar's full support, She had given birth to Caesar's son Caesarion, and she was in complete control of Egypt. Ptolemy XIV was just a figurehead, a name on documents to satisfy tradition. He had absolutely no real power. Cleopatra made all the decisions. She even traveled to Rome with Caesar, bringing both Caesarion and Ptolemy XIV with her. Imagine the scandal this caused in Rome. A foreign queen who was married to her own brother, with an illegitimate child from Rome's dictator, living openly in Caesar's villa. Roman society was absolutely shocked and horrified. For about 3 years, this arrangement continued. Cleopatra ruled Egypt with supreme power while technically being married to her 12, then 13, then 14-year-old brother. But then, in 44 BC, everything changed. Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome on the Ides of March. Cleopatra lost her most powerful protector and ally. She immediately rushed back to Egypt with Caesarion, knowing that her position was now extremely vulnerable. Rome was in chaos, with Caesar's assassins fighting against Mark Antony and Octavian. Egypt could be invaded at any moment by whoever won the Roman Civil War. And here's where the darkest part of our story happens. Just a few weeks after returning to Egypt, Ptolemy XIV suddenly died. The official cause unknown. Most historical sources simply say he died of natural causes. But come on, a healthy 14-year-old boy who happens to be the co-ruler mysteriously dies right when Cleopatra needs absolute power. Historians have debated this for 2,000 years. Many believe Cleopatra had him poisoned. Think about it logically, she needed to make her son Caesarion the co-ruler to strengthen his claim to Egypt and potentially to Rome. But she couldn't do that while Ptolemy XIV was alive, so he had to go. Within days of his death, Cleopatra declared 3-year-old Caesarion as her co-ruler, calling him Ptolemy XV. She had finally eliminated all threats from her family. The implications of this are absolutely chilling. If the historians are right, it means Cleopatra murdered her own brother, husband, a child in cold blood for political power. This wasn't self-defense like the civil war with Ptolemy XIII. This was calculated assassination. It shows just how ruthless and dangerous the game of ancient power really was. Cleopatra had learned the lesson her father taught when he killed his own daughter Berenice in the world of pharaohs. Family meant nothing compared to the throne. Love, morality, human decency, all of it was secondary to survival and power. Now let's talk about what this inbreeding actually did to the Ptolemaic family. Modern genetic studies have shown that generations of sibling marriages caused serious problems. Many Ptolemaic rulers showed signs of genetic disorders, unusual physical features, potential mental health issues, and shortened lifespans. The family tree wasn't even a tree anymore, it was basically a tangled mess of lines connecting the same people over and over. Cleopatra herself was the product of multiple generations of inbreeding. Her parents were likely related. Her grandparents were definitely siblings. Go back a few more generations, and you find the same names appearing again and again because cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, and brothers married sisters. The psychological impact of growing up in such an environment cannot be understated. Imagine knowing that your spouse is also your sibling, that your children are products of incest, that your entire family history is filled with the same taboo relationships. Imagine growing up watching your sisters marry your brothers, knowing that the same fate awaits you. Imagine the absolute lack of normal family bonds. Your brother is your husband, your son might be your future rival, your sister could be plotting your death. There was no such thing as unconditional familial love in the Ptolemaic dynasty. Every relationship was transactional, political, and potentially deadly. What makes Cleopatra's story even more complex is that she was actually brilliant and capable beyond just survival instincts. She spoke 9 languages fluently: Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Syrian, Median, and Parthian. She was educated in mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. She personally negotiated with foreign powers, managed Egypt's economy, and commanded military campaigns. In another world, in another family, she could have been remembered purely as one of history's greatest minds and leaders. But instead, her legacy is forever tied to these taboo marriages and her relationships with powerful Roman men. After Ptolemy XIV's death, Cleopatra's story continues with Mark Antony, another passionate love affair that would ultimately lead to her downfall. But the marriages to her brothers had already shaped who she had become. They taught her that power required ruthlessness, that family was expendable, that survival meant doing whatever was necessary, no matter how horrific. When she eventually faced defeat by Octavian and chose suicide by snake bite in 30 BC, she was ending a bloodline that had been twisted by generations of inbreeding and violence. Here's something that really makes you think. Cleopatra is often romanticized in movies and books as this exotic, beautiful queen who seduced powerful men. But the reality is so much darker and more tragic. She was a victim of a corrupt system that forced incestuous marriages on young women for political purposes. She was a survivor who did horrible things to stay alive in a family that killed each other for power. She was trapped between Egyptian traditions that required these marriages and her own ambitions to rule independently. Yes, she made terrible choices, possibly murdering her own brother, but she was also a product of one of history's most dysfunctional families. The Ptolemaic dynasty's practice of sibling marriage finally ended with Cleopatra's death. When Octavian conquered Egypt, he killed Caesarion and ended the 300-year rule of Ptolemaic pharaohs. Egypt became a Roman province, and the days of pharaohs marrying their siblings ended forever. But the legacy of this dark practice continued to fascinate and horrify people for thousands of years. It became a symbol of the absolute corruption that comes with unchecked power, the dangers of putting bloodline purity above human decency, and the horrific things people will do to maintain control. So what can we learn from Cleopatra's story? First, that history is way more complicated and disturbing than what we're taught in schools. The textbooks give us the sanitized version: Cleopatra the seductress, Cleopatra the beauty, Cleopatra the tragic heroine. But they leave out the incest, the child marriages, the possible fratricide, and the absolute dysfunction of her family. Second, that the pursuit of power can make people do absolutely unthinkable things. Cleopatra wasn't born evil or immoral. She was born into a system that normalized violence and incest, and she learned to play that game better than anyone else. Third, that we should be grateful we live in a time where such practices are not only illegal, but universally condemned. The fact that powerful families once routinely married siblings and murdered relatives seems almost unbelievable to us now, but it was reality for thousands of years. Cleopatra's life from age 18 to 21 tells us everything we need to know about the brutal reality of ancient power. In just 3 years, she was forced to marry a 10-year-old child who was her brother. She was exiled and had to raise an army. She survived a civil war. She watched her first husband, brother, drown. She became Julius Caesar's lover and had his child. She was immediately forced to marry another child brother, and she possibly had that brother murdered to secure power. Most people today don't experience that much trauma and drama in their entire lives. Cleopatra experienced it before she was 22 years old. The fact that she not only survived but thrived shows incredible strength, intelligence, and ruthlessness. But let's also acknowledge the victims in this story. Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV were children who never asked to be pharaohs or husbands to their sister. They were puppets controlled by advisors, trapped in the same sick system as Cleopatra. Ptolemy XIII died at 14, probably terrified and trying to escape. Ptolemy the 14th died at 14, possibly murdered by his own sister, wife. These weren't villains, they were victims of a corrupt dynasty that valued power over human life. The real villains were the generations of Ptolemaic rulers who normalized this practice, who made it tradition, who trapped their children in these horrific situations. The story of Cleopatra marrying her brothers twice isn't just ancient gossip, it's a window into understanding how power corrupts absolutely. It shows us that even the most celebrated figures in history have dark secrets that challenge our romanticized views. It reminds us that behind every throne, crown, and dynasty were real human beings dealing with trauma, making impossible choices, and often doing terrible things to survive. Cleopatra wasn't a Disney princess or a simple seductress. She was a complex, brilliant, ruthless survivor of one of history's most dysfunctional families. Today, we look back at the Ptolemaic dynasty's practice of sibling marriage with horror and disgust. We cannot imagine living in a world where such things were not only accepted, but required by law and tradition. We cannot fathom being forced to marry our own siblings, let alone doing it twice. But for Cleopatra and her family, this was just normal life. This was how power worked. This was survival, and that perhaps is the most disturbing part of all, that humans are capable of normalizing absolutely anything, no matter how taboo or immoral, if it serves the interests of those in power. The practice lasted for 300 years because each generation accepted it as normal, trained their children to accept it, and perpetuated the cycle. So the next time you see a movie about Cleopatra portrayed as a glamorous queen with a perfect life, remember the reality. Remember the 10-year-old brother she was forced to marry. Remember the civil war she had to fight against her own family. Remember the 14-year-old brother who mysteriously died when he became inconvenient to her plans. Remember that behind the crown and the beauty and the legend was a woman trapped in a system so twisted that incest and murder were just part of the job description. That's the real story of Cleopatra, not romance and glamour, but survival and sacrifice in the darkest corners of human civilization. If this story shocked you, if it changed how you think about ancient history, then hit that like button and subscribe, because there are so many more dark secrets hidden in history that nobody talks about. Share this video with someone who thinks they know everything about Cleopatra. Trust me, they don't know this part. Comment below telling me what shocked you most about this story. Was it the 2 marriages? The possible murder? The civil war against her own brother? I want to hear your thoughts. And remember, history isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's absolutely horrifying, but that's exactly why we need to talk about it, because the truth matters, no matter how dark it is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, where we uncover more shocking secrets that history tried to hide.